Hello there. My name is Noah Corrigan, and I want to thank you for uh, attending this portion of the academic symposium, where I go ahead and show off a little project I've been working on for the past semester. I call it Textquest. It's a sort of a little hobby project I've been working on the past semester as my capstone project. It's a combination of things I've learned in computer science that are relevant to my work, combined with a little bit of creative writing, which is something that is an interest to myself. So it's kind of a marriage between those two things. I worked on this project by myself. The programming, the work that went into the building of this project, as well as the writing of the material, was both my own work. So I kind of take a little bit of pride in that. So a quick introduction. What is it? Well, I got this idea when I started trying to think of uses that I could implement for Raspberry Pi. Now, for those of you who don't know, Raspberry Pi is basically a really small, really neat, cheap little computer that's really good for if you want to dedicate it to like a specific task. It's great for hobby programmers or computer science professionals that just want something small, light, and easy to work with. And so I started thinking, what can I do with mine that'd be something really cool and really interesting? And then I thought about my hobby of writing. And so I decided to go with this, which is basically I guess it's kind of a story. There's not as much story as I really would have liked for there to be in it, but it's kind of a story where like the choices that you make throughout, there's options to make different choices, A, B, C, etc. Those influence how it's going to play out. It was really fun to make using different programming means to influence that outcome. And yeah, it was kind of fun to make. Why? Why did I make it? Well, as I mentioned, it's relevant to my interests, both as a passion project, but also as sort of relevant to the career field I'm going into. Currently, I am working an internship that will hopefully turn into a full-time position at NAPIDE. And there's a lot of web programming in what I'm doing there. Lots of PHP, SQL, Ajax, JavaScript, working on what is effectively a web page or web app. And so I wanted to make something roughly similar to that. This project uses a lot of PHP and SQL, a little bit of CSS and HTML, working with databases and web pages in order to make something interesting. So about the Raspberry Pi itself, the model that I am using is a Raspberry Pi Model 4B. This is the newest version that is currently on the market. There are 3 different versions of the Model 4B, each with a different amount of RAM to it. There's models with 1 gigabyte of RAM, 2 gigabytes of RAM, and 4 gigabytes of RAM. I elected for the newest version that I could get, the most upgraded version I can get, as unlike most computers with this Raspberry Pi, if you decide you want more RAM later on for whatever reason, you cannot just upgrade it. It's built into the chip, it's built into the board, so you can't upgrade it later on. And so I figured, well, might as well get the newest version so it'll take as long as possible before it goes obsolete, which is a good practice to get into. It's not particularly powerful compared to a lot of other computers. is running on a 1.5 gigahertz quad-core processor, which is enough to get you by. Now, in terms of web servers, to host a website, this is definitely on the weaker end. Usually for a web server that's going to be hosting a website, you want something that's a little bit stronger than your average computer, not weaker. So this isn't, how do I put it? This isn't the type of thing you want to do for a very big project. But it's perfectly fine for something you just want to make just for the heck of it, just to show off, just to show that you can do it. So I thought that was a perfect use of this little device. It runs on something, an operating system called Raspbian, which is a form of Linux. It's a subset of Debian. I don't know a whole lot about it other than that it's really light, and the Raspberry Pi is it's really efficient, but it's a relatively inexpensive board. So you wouldn't be able to run anything like Windows on this. In order to actually convert it into, a web server, installed Apache and MySQL. Apache takes care of all the hosting of the website itself on the device, so that you can access it through its IP address. And MySQL is basically for managing databases and for making databases. And databases were important for this project because I wanted to, in a sort of point and click style adventure game where your choices matter, I wanted to make sure that users didn't just hit the back button on their browser if they ended up making a choice that, oops, that wasn't something I wanted to do. So I decided to use a database to keep track of users through databases and session managements in order to keep track of what users did. And by keeping track of users' choices, it also effectively makes it so that, you can't just hit the back button, because once you click the button to do this action, it updates the server and it knows you've done that. You can't undo it. So I wanted to make an experience where you only get one shot. In order to make this available to the public at large, I used something called DuckDNS, and I'll talk about that more on the next slide. So DuckDNS is basically a web service where you can redirect, you can not quite create, but reserve a subportion, a subdomain of DuckDNS of their website and set it up so that it redirects traffic to a certain IP address. And so I've got a section of it reserved and redirecting traffic to this Raspberry Pi through my router, through my network, to the device itself. Now, in doing so, I've made this available to anyone who has access to the link. And as you can see, the link is there, presented http://textquest.duckdns.org. That's the domain name that I reserved through them, that I made through them. You can visit more about their website and see more about their website at this link here. Just Google search duckdns.org and you'll be able to get more information about them and what they do. They do this for free because, well, if you look at their about page, they describe it as basically because they can, because before they tried to do this, they couldn't, and because learning is fun. So DuckDNS is somebody else's hobby project that they made just to see if they could. And I thought that was really neat. So thank you, DuckDNS, for helping me do this. So I've described a little bit about what this is. It's, as I've described, something like a point-and-click adventure game. The process goes that when you first log into the site, load into the site, you're presented with a page to log in. And if you don't have an account, there's a very simple page to make one. Once you've got an account, you can log in and in doing so, it'll start tracking you based on cookies on your browser. Now, if that sounds bad, just know that it's exactly the same as any other session where, like, if you log into, say, your bank's website, the way that it keeps track of your session and makes sure that it's actually you and not someone else, it's the same thing as that. It's not the way they track you. The way the site tracks you isn't invasive. It's the kind of standard login system you would expect on other websites. So don't be put off by that. It's tracked by browser sessions, and it keeps track of users' IDs that are generated as new users are made. And it uses that ID to sort of keep track of what you're doing through the web pages that are set up, so that way it keeps track of the choices that you make and, you know, keeps the story coherent. Account information is changed on the database by different pages and which buttons you push, which choices you make. It's all saved to the database, and there's even a method installed so that, say, for example, and I think I've used this example already, if you make a choice and then decide, oops, that wasn't the right decision, you can't just hit the back button on your browser. The web pages are set up to detect where you're supposed to be, in a sense. And if you try to go back to a page where the database recognizes you're not supposed to be there, it'll redirect you back to where you're supposed to be. That was kind of a fun little function to make. It might not be up to professional standards, but for amateur work, I feel pretty good about it. So that was a lot of fun to make, was that functionality of keeping track of where users are supposed to be and making sure they can't redirect themselves by, say, manually typing in a URL. So that was a lot of fun. When you first log in, when you first arrive at the web page, at the index, this is what it's going to look like. It's nothing particularly fancy, but then again, I never was very good at CSS and making stuff look good. But as you can see, it's a standard login section. I decided not to opt for passwords. Everything is kept track of by just the name you put in. I figure it's not long enough to keep track of people, and it's not anything too important where you need to make a username and a password. Even though I really could have done that and already had the files for it written out, I decided to opt for just keeping track of people's names and what name you put in. So whenever a user goes to make a name, goes to make an account, they have to put in a unique name. And if they put a name that already exists, like, hey, this already exists, you can't create this user. And you can see there's a create user section down there for what I'm talking about. So after you make your account and after you log in, a session is created and you're presented with a page that repeats your name back to you and presents you with a little bit of a preface as well as your first choice. And this is where your little mini story and adventure begins. It's not as elaborate and fancy as I really wanted to make it, but it's not too shabby either. I'm a computer science major, not a writing major, so it's pretty good to get by. Anyway, I could go through the whole thing and sit here and describe all the choices to you, but I feel like that would kind of spoil it, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to give you this link here and tell you, go check it out for yourself. This this website is live right now. As I've described through the previous pages, it's set up so that the IP address for this Raspberry Pi is linked to this subsection of DuckDNS right here. You can go to this link and see the rest of my project and see how it fleshes out. Feel free to make an account, go through, and if you don't get the ending you want, make a new account, go through again. The results are permanent for that account, so if you want to try again, you'll have to make a new one. So that was another reason for not requiring users to include a password, was you might make 2 or 3 throwaway accounts just to, just to go through it all and see all that it has to offer. So in order to make that easier, I decided to not go with passwords. Just put in a unique name each time and you'll be fine. But yeah, go to just Google search Textquest, all one word, lowercase, .duckdns.org, and you'll get to my project. I am recording this ahead of time for the academic symposium, so at this time, the Raspberry Pi is up and running, and I will leave it up through the date the academic symposium is supposed to run. So at the time that you're watching this, it should definitely still be up, unless DuckDNS goes down. I've seen that happen once for like an hour. But if it is, just save this URL and go try it again sometime. If you're watching this for whatever reason in the really distant future, like, I don't know, 2022 or something like that, 2 years in the future, it probably won't still be up, but for the next like month or so, definitely this will still be here. So yeah, go check it out if you will. I don't really have the ability to take questions. Normally I would reserve some time to be able to do that. So yeah, due to the medium, I can't really ask questions. So instead of asking questions, I'm just sort of guess at what questions are asked, like what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, what challenges I encountered. And so I'll start going through that right now. As far as challenges, well, as you can see here, security was a big one. Obviously, taking a device and port forwarding it, putting it on the internet like this, there's lots of opportunity for hackers to just try and get into this Raspberry Pi and do stuff with it it's not supposed to do. So setting it up to be secure was kind of an ordeal in itself. Installing a firewall and this little program called fail2ban, which is it basically detects if the Raspberry Pi is being attacked repeatedly, and if so, if there's repeated unauthorized access attempts, it will just block the attacker's IP address altogether. Interesting problem with that, setting up all that security, was while I'm pretty confident it's secure to outside attackers, it was also difficult trying to work with it after that. Ideally, I would have liked to be able to remote into the Raspberry Pi after making everything set up, but I'm pretty sure something with the firewall, I'm pretty sure I didn't set the permissions right and accidentally locked myself out of it, so that I couldn't use remote programs like FileZilla and MySQL Workbench to remotely work on it. Had to resort to some direct means of access to that, which basically boiled down to unplugging the monitor, mouse, and keyboard from my standard PC and plugging them into the Raspberry Pi every time I wanted to go in and edit the code and work on it. So that was fun, but it ended up working out at the end. Maybe eventually I'll figure out what the issue was with the firewall and get around it, but during the time that I was working on this project, I didn't get that figured out. What I took away from this project, what I liked about it, it was fun. It was really cool working with a lot of PHP, figuring out innovative ways of like basically keeping track of data, keeping track of events, whether or not people have done certain actions before trying things or not, whether or not you have the right item for a specific task before you try it, determines whether or not you fail, and that'll direct you to various different pages accordingly. There was a lot of logic involved, and it felt a lot like, kind of like making a maze or a puzzle. It was a neat creative process, and I really enjoyed that creative process. It was really satisfying to go through after everything was done and just watch as everything, all of the data, all of the information was kept track of the way it was supposed to, track the sessions properly, track the user IDs properly. It was a fun puzzle to work on, fun puzzle to program. Heck, just setting up the Raspberry Pi itself was a lot of fun. Getting everything installed, getting everything working properly. There were a lot of little bitty problems that I had to sort out. But in the end, that was actually satisfying when I got everything to work finally and got those problems sorted out. One of the programs that I used to actually manage the database, I don't know if I downloaded an older version of it or not. And I won't say what it was for security reasons, but like the files themselves had lots of little bugs in them, like semicolons missing in the midst of code. So it felt really satisfying knowing where to look in the error logs and using what I knew to sort out where those errors were and fix them. That was a lot of fun. And as I've mentioned, it fits perfectly with my career path. The way I'm going, it looks like I'll be dealing with a lot of PHP and SQL, so it's good to have those skills under my belt. Ideally, I probably should have used Ajax for this project, but I haven't gotten that good with it yet, so I ended up opting out of that. And that is all I have for this presentation. As I've said, if you're curious for more information about it, please go check it out for yourself. Textquest.duckdns.org to see the finished project and go through it. And yeah, that's really all I have for this. I appreciate your time.